clearly The Lord of the Rings is one of the most celebrated cinematic film franchises of all time. It's one of the most beloved. That original trilogy from director Peter Jackson was almost groundbreaking in its execution. It's still
Yeah.
kind of a marvel in storytelling and how that movie was even made. I still don't really
Hmm.
understand how they did it and how they pulled it
It's
off.
crazy. It's so crazy.
And we haven't seen it replicated, that type of
No.
filmmaking and that type of schedule and just what they sought to do and just the ambition of adapting those really, really popular books. Obviously, now we do have the Lord of the Rings of Power show on Amazon Prime Video, but the Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, this is the return of this franchise back to theaters after the Hobbit franchise, which ran from 2012 to 2014. And the making of this movie really came about simply because New Line Cinema, they were running out of time in terms of their acquisition of the licensing of this franchise. And so
Hmm.
they had to make a movie. They had to make a theatrically released movie, or they would have lost the licensing rights to make any future Lord of the Rings movies. And so this film was born out of a necessity to really just maintain the rights. But they decided to do something a little bit different and make an anime inspired movie and not do anything live action. But this is set before the original Lord of the Rings film trilogy that we saw back in the
Hmm.
early 2000s. This is set nearly 200 years before the events of that movie, and it's focusing on the legendary king of Rohan and his family as they defend their kingdom against an army of Dundelings. And so we sort of follow that story, again, taking place well before we meet any of our primary heroes in that original film trilogy. And so with all of that out the way, man, I'll pass it to you. What did you think about the Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim?
Oh man, The War of the Rohirrim, another film I was super extra excited for in this fall season. The trailer comes out. It's so, like you said, it's anime inspired. It looks beautiful. I was excited to merge those two worlds. Lord of the Rings is like a perfect trilogy. I don't even understand how they did that to this day. It really is a marvel in the cinematic world. It blows my mind. And man, this movie, after seeing it, I am just honestly pretty disappointed in it. Do I think it's a completely train wreck and bad film? No, I don't think that's the case. But I do think there was a lot of potential here that was left to be fulfilled, and there was more to be desired. To put it quite plainly, a lot of this movie is just boring. There's some things that are cool to look at and beautiful, and I do like the animation, but even the animation at times just didn't feel as fluid as I thought it would. And usually I think most animated movies, people don't talk about that until it's something like Spider-Verse, right? Where you see something moving in the frames, you're like, whoa, what is this thing that's happening? But here in this movie, it didn't really feel like a creative choice being done like it does in something like Spider-Verse. It's like, I don't know if something wasn't finished. I don't know if it was this. They did take a very different process to animate this film. It could be that process that made it look and feel like this, but in seeing it, it doesn't. Sometimes that lack of fluidity doesn't feel like a creative choice. It just feels like, well, that's how it turned out. Let's go ahead and put it out. Though again, I will say it is beautiful, and I do love the art direction behind the film itself. Other than that, another thing about this film is it it kind of does. Earlier you were talking about Lion King and like how you have to check box a prequel thing. This movie existed so you could just figure out where the hell we were and why this location was called this location. That's what it felt like. I feel like we went this whole film just to hear the words, and I spoiler, not spoiler, I don't know what this is, just to hear the words Helm's Deep. And I was like, are we serious? That's what this was? That's what this was for? And it is a little frustrating because again, I feel like we had components that were really cool. We had the female heroine. She got this cool red hair. She seems like she's going to do some really cool things. And don't get me wrong, she kind of does, but everything around her, some of the side characters, some of the villains are just kind of boring. There is a beautiful scene in the snow that I love. It's animated beautifully. The fight is really cool. I like that scene, but I think I was just hoping for more in this film. Usually animation doesn't bore me like this, but I was like, ooh, this is a slog to get through. overall, I still don't think it's a bad film. There is still somewhat of a story that can be interesting. If you've never seen Lord of the Rings, I can see why you would be like, okay, this is fine. But overall, man, yeah, I just left the theater disappointed and wanted more, and I think that's too bad.
The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. This movie has zero electricity behind it, zero wattage, zero energy at all behind this movie. And I think it's been proven based on the very, very mixed reception and the very, very soft, disappointing box office results of this movie. But I think in reality, in truth, if I'm being honest, I think that this is the deserved response for this movie, because knowing that this was simply made to retain the licensing rights for this franchise already is an immediate red fucking flag. There's no creative spirit or energy behind this movie because they said, hey, we got to scramble to put something together. You know what? It'll probably be a lot easier to make an animated movie that's half-assed as opposed to trying to figure out a creative original story that's going to be told in live action that people probably won't like anyway because it's going to be unrelated to that original trilogy. Because let's just be honest, I don't think a lot of people have a ton of interest in the Lord of the Rings if we're not following the characters that we already know and the story that we already know. And so this kind of felt like the best case solution for them in terms of how can we put something out quickly, relatively cheap, because the budget's only $30 million, and I think you can tell, and make sure that it gets out in a reasonable time so that we can maintain these rights. And when a movie is born out of that type of cynicism, I'm obviously not going to be here for it. I get your business. You got to do what you got to do. But at the same time, this is not a real movie to me. It's not even like a canon event. This is just like a side project that just so happened to come out. And I am disappointed because I was looking forward to it as well, thinking that there was something interesting here to say, thinking that this was born out of a creative desire to do something different. But it's really not. I think it's just symbolic of a shortcut. That's what it feels like, just a shortcut movie just to do something to make sure that they're hitting certain deadlines. And this has happened before. They're not the first perpetuators of this type of stuff. We see it happen all the time with different studios. We talk about Sony all the time and what they do. But you can just feel that shit in every frame because this movie is boring. It's slow. It's way too long. There's no reason that an animated movie of this stature should be 134 minutes. It's not like it's a sequel or anything. The characters aren't that interesting. The voice acting is okay. It's fine. And then ultimately the story itself, I just didn't find compelling. And as you said, once you realize some of those things that they're doing to just connect it to the lore that we already know, it's just lazy and really, really non-creative at all. And I just didn't enjoy any of that stuff. It's just a real sad effort and disappointment, and nobody is seeing it. Nobody's talking about it. It's going to be the most forgotten thing that's come out in this past year, and they're just going to have to move forward and lick their wounds and make a live action Lord of the Rings movie, which they certainly plan to do. Warner Brothers does, and New Line Cinema. David Zaslav has already confirmed that. I think the only thing that they can walk away from, feeling positive about this is the fact that they didn't spend a ton on it. It wasn't that expensive, and so they won't lose a lot of money because there was very little investment to begin with. And just knowing that they didn't really put any energy or resources behind this, why the fuck am I supposed to care? Like, why am I supposed to be excited about this once I know all this information now? And then you see the story, and it does not rise above any of those elements or those things that we know about it. And so can't recommend it, can't encourage people to see it. I don't think that it's going to make any Lord of the Rings fan happy. I'd honestly encourage you to watch The Rings of Power before this, because season 2 actually kicked it up a notch and got pretty decent this year. I wouldn't have said that about season 1. I hated season 1, but season 2 was kind of decent. So I would just say, if you're going to watch something Lord of the Rings that's not the original trilogy and certainly not The Hobbit, just watch the show. They're at least trying over there. They didn't try with this movie, so I can't recommend it. Folks, those are all of our thoughts on The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim. If you've checked it out, which I know you haven't, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.